Hey everybody, it's Party Elite with another episode of Total Breakdown. Today's battle pits the Mighty Mulletman's Bloody Handz against the Empire led by Loli. Wurzag, the Great Green Prophet, dances his way onto the field to lead the Bloody Handz. He's decked out with the power of Dewa and Squiggly Beast to keep his winds of magic flowing, War Paint of Wurzag to provide damage resistance, Wurzag's Revenge, which will increase the likelihood of an enemy miscast by 50%, his Bonewood Staff working in tandem with magic to give plus 16 melee attack and a plus 18% charge bonus whenever a spell goes off, Fists of Gork, Here We Go, Foot of Gork, and Foe Seeker, as well as Wa and Effigy of the Git. So, like I said, very decked out. Two goblin big bosses ride in on spiders alongside to cause poison damage, and one carries a potion of strength and is slippery, while the other is just carrying that potion of strength. Then we've got 2 units of goblins, one ranked up to rank 3, 2 units of Savage Orcs, and 4 units of Savage Orc Biggins. Savage Orcs paired with Wurzag is a common battlefield occurrence nowadays, as their natural physical resistance pairs nicely with Wurzag's added 12% damage resistance he gives from Warpaint of Wurzag to units nearby. Then we've got Broken Tusks Mob to supplement the Savage Orc Biggins in their anti-large capabilities, and Goblin Wolf Rider Archers and Mogrub's Mangy Marauders to get some harassment in there, and some armor-piercing missiles with the Mangy Marauders. The Rock Lobber can cause significant damage early on, and the Hammer of Gork can do the same while also blinding the enemy, which can be very helpful later on in the battle. Boris Todbringer flies in to lead the Empire, with the Midland Runefang to keep him alive, and Crush the Weak to make it easier to finish off units whose morale has already been reduced. The Bright Wizard comes in on horseback and is a great call in this matchup. Savage Orcs are already weak to fire, so bringing Kindle Flame to further that weakness by another 12% was a great call, while also bringing Cascading Fire Cloak to provide defensive strength and armor piercing in the case of armored support units. And finally, Flaming Sword of Ruin gives magical and fire damage to targeted allied units alongside a boost to damage output. That will work wonders against the Savage Orcs, who are, as I mentioned, weak to fire damage. The 4 units of Spearmen, 3 ranked up to rank 1, will do alright against cavalry and can hold Savage Orcs in place, and the presence of 4 Greatsword units suggests that the Empire was worried about having guessed wrong and facing off against armored units in place of Savage Orcs, but it does provide great anti-infantry strength, so it is a safe bet. The 2 units of Crossbowmen will provide great range support, and the Demigryph Knights with Halberds and the Royal Altdorf Griffites can be used to shut down enemy cavalry easily. Alright, as always, we start with a conversation about layout, and it's relatively simple from both sides of the field this time around. Let's start, of course, with the Bloody Handz. Now, up front, we've got 2 units of goblins. They're sort of able to absorb any incoming charges or actually lock in units themselves, while this large line of Savage Orc Biggins back here are able to dive in afterwards to bring in the pain. Alternatively, of course, they can also respond to incoming cavalry as they are anti-large. Now you'll see right behind them we have the regular Savage Orcs as well. Again, these guys also able to dive in wherever necessary, provide that pain, provide that hurt, and trying to keep them close to Wurzag is always a good idea. As I mentioned earlier, that extra damage resistance is extremely helpful. Off to the side here, you'll see we've got the Broken Tusks Mob as well as both Goblin Big Bosses, trying to keep that poison damage alongside the anti-large contingent. And then right in front of them, we have the Hammer of Gork as well as the regular Goblin Rock Lobber, trying to get shots off right away. And then up front here, again, just that little bit of cheekiness, we've got the Goblin Wolf Rider Archers and the Mangy Marauders right up front, trying to get some early harassment in. Meanwhile, from the Empire, a pretty simple layout overall. It was a front line of spearmen. Right behind them, we had a line of great swords able to, again, dive in and provide support wherever and however necessary. And then we had the 2 units of crossbowmen and the spearmen all the way at the back, trying to protect those crossbowmen in case any flanking maneuvers came in. And of course, we also have the Demigryph Knights with Halberds and the Royal Altdorf Griffites already making their moves, coming in to supplement from the flanks and try and get some flanking maneuvers in, of course. Unfortunately, however, it is in fact the Greenskins, the Bloody Handz, that get the initial aggression off. You'll see the Goblin Wolf Riders got some shots into these Spearmen, doing just a touch of damage, but we should pay attention to these Mangy Marauders with their armor-piercing missiles firing into the Royal Altdorf Griffites and doing a fair amount of damage. You'll see they're able to actually ride away because they are a lot faster than the Royal Altdorf Griffites, and that's some great play to start the battle off with. And you'll see they're just retreating, getting just out of reach of the Royal Altdorf Griffites and opening fire at the same time. And over here, Boris Todbringer really should have been brought in to shut this down instantaneously. These guys are retreating, they are pulling back, but of course the Mangy Marauders are able to just give chase that if that is the case. So again, you'll see Boris now finally brought in to respawn, but the mangy marauders here are already causing a decent amount of damage, and they continue to give chase, and they continue to get that damage out. You'll see on the flip side, the regular Wolf Rider archers aren't really doing that much work. They got a little bit of damage in here and there, but apart from that, they're not really doing too much work because they are weak against armor, and as Boris comes in as well, their leadership does start to trickle down, so they did a decent job sort of harassing and providing more of a shield or a screen, we can say, for the mangy marauders, because they're getting a lot of work in. They haven't killed anybody yet, but look at those Royal Altdorf Griffites. Their health is dropping pretty fast, so great move there, great call. Meanwhile, off to the side here, you'll see the Demogryph Knights with Halberds are trying to take the long way around to come in from the rear, maybe get an engagement off with the Broken Tusks mob, but that's very risky with the two Goblin Big Bosses nearby. And let's see over here as Boris decides to chase after the wrong target entirely. This was a bad call because unfortunately that leaves the Mangy Marauders here open to continue firing into the Royal Altdorf Griffites and getting that armor-piercing damage in. Between the two of these guys, it was really the Mangy Marauders that were the ideal target. So unfortunately, Boris is chasing the wrong unit here, and that's going to be extremely expensive. Meanwhile, the Rock Lobbers over here, the Goblin Rock Lobber and the Hammer of Gork, doing a decent amount of work targeting these units in the center here, and you can see these Spearmen have already taken a fair amount of hurt. These Crossbowmen back there, as well as these Great Swords, because they're so clumped up together, even shots that miss ultimately end up hitting something else. So great use of artillery there, making sure some early damage does get done. One of these units is targeting the Spearmen. Not the best call. They're the weakest enemy unit on the field, more or less, so should have actually spent more time targeting the Great Swords themselves, because they can actually do some work. Meanwhile, over here, you'll see these guys have positioned themselves to prepare against a potential Demigryph Knight charge. So a lot of action going on as these Savage Orcs charge down, and the Mangy Marauders continue to give chase to the Royal Altdorf Griffites, trying to shut them down ASAP. Now, as these charges go in, you'll see these goblins try to dive in and get these units engaged so that the Savage Orc Biggins and the Savage Orcs can dive in and provide the real support. Here we go, does go down just before lines meet, which is perfect timing because that'll cause a lot of initial damage. So great work there, and you'll see Flaming Sword of Ruin does go down as well. So another great call, trying to get that extra damage, get that fire damage in nice and early. So great use of magic here. Wah goes down as well, and that is absolutely insane because take a look at what's going on. Insane in the good way, by the way. 180 melee attack for the Savage Orc Biggins. That's huge. These Savage Orc Biggins as well, 164. Meanwhile, the Spearmen on the other side they don't have the melee defense to hold up against that. And same goes for the Greatswords. You can see how quickly they're being taken care of. This is a non-issue. These goblins, of course, are taking some hurt with only 136 melee attack. I say only, in comparison to their Savage Orc brethren, but their melee defense is really low, so they're being taken care of, but apart from that, the Empire's troops are falling apart, and Boris is just hanging up there, waiting far too long, really needs to be sent in to dive in here, engage, and win one of these flanks, or win the center engagement, because you'll see off to the side here, without any support even, these Savage Orcs are making very quick work of these Spearmen. Again, Spearmen don't really stand a chance in this engagement, so unfortunately most of them are not going to go home today. Meanwhile, off to the side here, you'll see the Broken Tusks mob and the two Goblin Big Bosses giving chase to these Demigryph Knights with Halberds, trying to keep them away, because these Demigryph Knights with Halberds have, well, they don't stand a chance over here, so they really need to push in or work around these guys and try to get in some rear charges or something, because really they're being wasted off to the side over here. And you'll see over here, we've got the Royal Altdorf Griffites trying to push in with a rear charge. So good call there, trying to be as effective with them, use them as efficiently as possible because they are withering away. So they're trying to get a rear charge on these Savage Orc Biggins, who have also been supported with the Fists of Gork. So again, great use of magic there, getting them that extra melee attack and damage, and making sure their defensive capabilities are also kept up as they are engaged with some great swords. Now, you'll see Boris here flies over top and then finally decides to dive in and get engaged against Wurzag, and Wurzag needs to be pulled out of there because he has very low melee defense, so he does need to be pulled away to some safety, and you'll see his morale does drop almost instantaneously as well. And here, as the Royal Altdorf Griffites charged in and forced these Savage Orc Biggins to get terrified and flee, great move, I have to say. You'll see as they pulled away, they got focused down on again, and a lot of damage going through, but they're moving in for the rinse and repeat. So great move there, charging in, trying to get more of that terror in there, and meanwhile these goblins, of course, they are routing. Not really able to expect too much from them, but you know, good use of them nonetheless. And you'll see meanwhile the Rock Lobbers are still firing away now, sort of targeting these ranged units here, trying to get some hurt into the spearmen and the crossbowmen. Good call, wanting to shut these guys down nice and early. And you'll see over here, there's finally an engagement as the Broken Tusks mob and the Demogryph Knights with halberds do engage. And that is a terrible call for the Demogryph Knights with halberds. With poison this close by, the Goblin Big Bosses alongside the Broken Tusks mob will make very quick work of the Demogryph Knights with halberds. Let's try and keep that on screen as the battle continues. There's a lot going on. You'll see those guys are dropping like flies very quickly, losing health. And over here you'll see as Terror takes control of the Bloody Handz' front line, they are losing this flank over here, the left flank seen from their side. And meanwhile, Effigy of the Git does go down on Boris Todbringer, damaging him quite hard. Meanwhile, Wurzag is trying to get out of there again, has taken a lot of damage himself, and is also very low on morale. And in the meanwhile, you'll see Flaming Sword of Ruin continues to provide support to these great swords and these spearmen, trying to punch through and cause a fair amount of damage. And the Hammer of Gork, meanwhile, just destroying these guys. And finally, you'll see up here, the Demogryph Knights with halberds have been taken care of. The Broken Tusks mob are able to disengage and come in here from the rear, get a great rear charge, and crush this right flank, again, as seen from the Bloody Handz' perspective, because the Goblin Big Bosses are able to just shut down these Demogryph Knights with halberds. Meanwhile, you'll see over here, we do have that charge coming in, just tossing these guys around and causing a significant amount of damage. So great work there. And meanwhile, the mangy marauders continue to open shots off, now targeting, it looks like, the crossbowmen. Not the worst call, could actually push in with melee, but you'll see over here the Broken Tusks mob, after doing that rear charge, decide to push into these crossbowmen. Great call there, shutting them down, and just able to get rid of the crossbowmen back there, or at least to stop them from firing. And same goes for these guys, continuing to push in. And here you'll see we have the Cascading Fire Cloak trying to keep these great swords alive, because they are getting a lot of work done. They are doing a fair amount of damage to these Savage Orcs, and so wanting to keep them alive and fighting for as long as possible. And again, Terror kicks in, forcing these guys to pull away. And over here you'll see these Savage Orc Biggins are doing quite well against these great swords. So good work there, trying to shut down these great swords. And meanwhile here, the Royal Altdorf Gryphites finally able to make their way in and shut down that artillery. Now, that was a good call, shutting down the artillery, because it was doing a lot of damage. However, once again, it was far too little, far too late. Those guys have already got a lot of hurt into the crossbowmen, into the spearmen that were resting back there. And now Mogrub's mangy marauders are just giving chase and probably running quite a few of these guys down with their steeds. So really unfortunate that that the rock lobbers weren't shut down earlier. And you'll see up here, these Demogryph Knights with halberds were able to scare off one of these Goblin Big Bosses, but they've taken a lot of damage and are going to be largely inefficient at this point. Boris, meanwhile, up in the air, sort of relaxing a little bit, should have been sent in against Wurzag to finish him off, kill him. Morale is very easy to break when it comes to the greenskins with the Bloody Handz. So Boris should have been sent down to finish off Wurzag. Instead, he comes down against Broken Tusks mob, and that's not the best call. They are anti-large, so that's not a good idea at all. There's no value in trying to keep these spear infantry alive. Sort of a bad call there all the way through. And you'll see Wurzag is now willing to fight again, and this Goblin Big Boss is diving in, trying to shut down some of these great swords. These guys over here now fully surrounded, so these great swords are not going to stick around for too long. You'll see these Demogryph Knights are trying to come in to provide some support, but there's very little to do there, as these great swords will be very quickly taken care of. And again, these are Savage Orc Biggins, so they are anti-large. So again, another risky, dangerous call by the Royal Altdorf Gryphites there. And meanwhile, you'll see these Demogryph Knights instead decide to give chase to Broken Tusks mob. Very risky, but in this case, it might play out well, because they are getting a fair amount of damage in, especially through Boris earlier, who now unfortunately is on his way out once again. Wurzag once again coming back in though, and he does provide support. Drops Here We Go, making very quick work of whatever's left of the Empire in the center here. And Boris now finally giving chase to Wurzag, trying to shut him down. It's about time. He's a very important target. Dropping leadership is extremely important against the Greenskins, and you'll see here everyone does return, wants to finish off the Empire, wants to get some blood and want to go to war. Unfortunately, Wurzag does die, which is too bad, but you'll see overall the Empire does shatter. Now, though Wurzag died and can dance no more, this Pyrrhic victory really shows his strengths when leading a Savage Orc army. The Empire was simply unable to shut down the Orc army, and the investment in infantry was a little lopsided. Without enough cavalry, enemy range units would have always had a field day, and in this case specifically, why not bring the Knights of the Blazing Sun if you suspect Savage Orcs and you're bringing Kindle Flame to the field to begin with? The Royal Altdorf Gryphites were also simply not kept safe, and the spearmen were largely wasted on the front line. Some of them could have been brought in to actually interrupt the mangy marauders and at least help keep the Royal Altdorf Gryphites alive, or at least allow them to pull away from that armor-piercing ranged fire. As always, guys, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Total War content and keep sending in those battle replays. I think it is an absolutely amazing way to learn, and it's great to watch generals from across the world and how they command their armies. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you on the battlefield.